This is the second in a series of videos that I'm doing that are reflecting on and responding to points that were made in Michael Burns' recent video, Philosophy, YouTube is Broken. And in this one, I want to talk about my own channel a bit more and the kind of work that I specifically do in light of the points and claims and arguments that he's making. So I already did a video that was summing up the points, claims, arguments, concerns with my own commentary. Now I'm going to focus specifically on, where I fit into that with respect to my own channel and the work that I do. And I'll say right off the bat, I'm kind of an outlier when we're talking about philosophy YouTube. It's nice that people sometimes say, oh, he's one of the first. I'm actually not one of the first. There were people before me, or, I'm an OG person doing it. I have been around for quite a while. This is, year, I think 14 for me. I've been uploading videos since 2011, and I've produced over 3,700 videos. I don't know how many streams I've done, but quite a few. And I'm also an outlier, not just in terms of like longevity, but also in how I do my videos. So, if you're a longtime follower of the channel, you know that I don't spend an awful lot of my time and thought and effort on high production, glitzy stuff. I have improved video quality in some respects using a lapel mic, getting better cameras, better lighting, learning how to edit things better. But I don't put a ton of effort into, catchy thumbnails or SEO optimization or any of that kind of stuff that I think a lot of other YouTubers, including in the philosophy world, do that. I'm not focused on production. I'm focused on quality presentation. And I don't do a lot of indulging in drama. I'm pretty, even about things. I don't like hyperbole, in part because it's usually disproportionate and kind of, untruthful or even dishonest in a lot of cases. I don't focus a ton on current events or trendy topics. And I don't do a lot of examining analytics or metrics, whatever you want to call them, or optimization of any sort. So, those are some differences between me and some of the other YouTubers out there. And I've never attempted to make YouTube and whatever adjuncts there are, like selling merch or, sponsorships, my main source of income, which I think is also a bit different than a lot of the people in what we can call philosophy YouTube. So what I'm going to say here, maybe it doesn't actually apply to those other people so much, but I hope that it's relevant to the larger topics. So the first thing I really want to talk about, I think that Michael Burns has really put his finger on one important question. How do you balance creative or individual goals with what it is that YouTube as a platform really wants, which is eyeballs on the videos so that they can sell ads? And they want you as a creator to, make your stuff as attractive and compelling and, sticky, we could say, as possible. They also want you to focus a lot on channel growth. How can you build your channel? How can you make it bigger? And there's not a lot of thought going into, well, should your channel grow? And if so, why? What good is it actually offering? And it's easy to get, I think, sucked into that. This is a really legitimate concern, I would say. And I have, for my part, been relatively insulated because of the focus that I have. I'm primarily interested in providing competent lectures and discussions of complex philosophical thinkers, texts, topics that are true to the text. They, don't engage in a ton of we could say, negative or positive spin or hyperbole or other kinds of hype. I do other kinds of things. I have a Worlds of Speculative Fiction series. I have a classic metal class that I do with my friend Scott Cerulli every so often. I've told stories in videos, right? People like that sort of stuff as well. I've done a lot of book reviews. But I think that the book reviews kind of fit in with the lectures and even the classic metal class. We're talking about philosophical topics. And the reason I do this is that early on, I realized that I had a sort of talent, and this was even before I got onto YouTube, just giving talks and stuff like that, for taking complex and tricky philosophical matters and talking about them in a way that wouldn't, water them down, but would allow a wide range of people to understand them, to make them accessible. So that's what I've basically stuck with through most of this time, right? And I also know that there's gaps in the available videos on particular thinkers, topics, texts. So, I've often shot videos or series of videos precisely because there wasn't something that was a resource. So a prime example of that, probably the biggest project along those lines, the Half-Hour Hegel series. People were like, I'd really like for there to be a good commentary video series on Hegel's phenomenology. And so for 9 years, I shot 376 videos working through Hegel's phenomenology, right? And, there was a bit of ad revenue from them. I also had a Patreon for it, but it was pretty much a labor of love because I thought it was a text worth talking about, even though I'm not a Hegelian. And, people have found them quite useful. I don't have the challenge that I think that some other YouTubers might have of trying to find something to say. I always have too many ideas that I can't get to. It's always been that way with me, not just with video, but also writing and stuff like that. So I haven't really had a difficulty in balancing my intellectual or creative goals with being on YouTube, in part because I've always prioritized that. And that's been, perhaps to the detriment of the channel. I don't get as many views as the more high production, low content videos that other channels have produced, where they're basically looking for lots of eyes and lots of engagement. And I've always had to, compete with people doing that. And I think that people who do the kind of work that I do also have to compete in what they call the marketplace of attention, right? With other people and other channels that have more prestige, maybe they've got Yale University behind them. That was an early thing, Yale courses coming out. Well, it's really easy to make video series when you don't have to do anything. Somebody else is filming you, and then you got Yale University putting it out for you, right? Or, funding. People have, solicited money for their channels. I also have to compete with popular approaches to things that might be watering the stuff down a bit or, focusing on the latest trendy topic. I think there's a lot of channels that are basically just edutainment, where it's more entertainment than education. And, I'm not knocking them. That's going to happen. That's always been the case. Even back in terms of print or radio or other media, and that's okay. It is still possible to compete and to get plenty of people checking your stuff out, but you're swimming up against a current that is often quite strong. So that's one topic. Is it going to be compatible doing philosophy on YouTube with actually doing philosophy? There's also another question that's being asked, and I think that this is a big one too. Is doing philosophy on YouTube sustainable? And so we can talk about this in two different ways. We can talk about it as being sustainable as a way of earning an income, which almost all of us need to do unless you're independently wealthy, which isn't the case for me. And I'm guessing most other people doing philosophy on YouTube, that's not the case for them. You need to be able to derive some income. So is YouTube going to be part of that? And then there's sustainable also in the other sense of, is it psychologically sustainable? Or are you going to burn out or feel like you're faking the funk and get tired of selling yourself and taking interesting philosophical ideas and making them more palatable by reducing them to the lowest common denominator or hyping them up and stuff like that. So in terms of income, for me, it's not sustainable. Not if YouTube is supposed to be my full-time job. But I've never tried to be a full-time YouTuber. If you're doing that, well, then maybe you do have to pander a bit, right? I would say that the most that I ever earned in any given month from YouTube was at the height of the pandemic when everybody was watching YouTube, and that was about $800 a month, right? So definitely not enough to live on. Maybe if I changed the channel radically and I was talking about what does Immanuel Kant say about sexual ethics, and I made it really high production, maybe I would have more views, right? If I was doing weekly streams on the sexy topic of the day, but I didn't do that. So for me, it's really not a thing I'm doing full time, but that's because I have other stuff. If you are doing it full time, well, then it gets tricky. You got to be able to earn enough to support yourself, and everything's getting more expensive these days, isn't it? And YouTube takes a significant cut of whatever ad revenue you're getting. Now you could maybe make it up with merch, but the merch companies also take a cut, sponsorships, whatever it happens to be, affiliate marketing. Everybody's taking their little taste out of what you're doing, right? If you need a whole team, well, you got to figure out a way to pay that team. So some of the bigger channels that churn out lots and lots of content that's very high production and oriented towards trying to get as many eyeballs on them as possible, they might be struggling as well. How do you stay on top? If you want it to be sustainable, you might actually need to do some drama and pandering and watering things down. Or you find the magic, we're going to all be elite and you're going to be part of a special club or something like that. That's another way to do it. What makes it sustainable for me? Because I have been doing this now for 14 years and I don't plan to stop doing it. I might do it for 2 more decades or something. It's not my sole income source. Now, certainly, YouTube helps me to get speaking gigs, and people want to study with me, so they take my online classes or sign up for tutorials or other things like that. And it's because of my YouTube presence. But I'm not trying to make my whole income from a YouTube channel. It's not even my main source of income. I also think that for me, part of what makes it sustainable is the fact that I stick with the stuff that I know how to do, that I'm, good at, which is, and actually like to do, which is taking, as I said, philosophical texts, thinkers' topics, and explaining them, sometimes discussing them with a wide range of people, from academics all the way to people who've never had a chance to go to college and everybody in between, in a way that they can appreciate. So it's my vocation in a way, right? And so I think that there's a certain kind of integrity there that allows me to keep doing what I'm doing. And, I know that the videos that I'm shooting are evergreen resources for the most part, in part because I'm not focusing so much on whatever the newest topic is, right? if you want to study Immanuel Kant, we don't need a ton more videos on Immanuel Kant and the news of the day. You got to like actually go through his texts and say, here's what's going on in the prolegomena. Here's what's going on in the groundwork, or as I'm going to be shooting some videos on later on this year, the actual metaphysics of morals. Won't be doing the whole book, but some parts that have to do with relationships, friendship, and sexual involvements for one of my classes that I'm teaching. And so I've been producing these resources that I know when I'm shooting them, they're supposed to be out there helping people. Whoever wants to study Hegel or Aristotle or Mary Wollstonecraft or pick whoever else you want, they can go to those resources. Another thing that makes it sustainable for me is the fact that I get a lot of good interactions with people who appreciate the work that I do. And the people who are jerks to me, I just block them. And I don't have to interact with them anymore. Right? If somebody wants to complain about my content, there's a million other places they can go, and they don't have to be hanging out on my live streams or on my videos, complaining about all sorts of stuff that probably is fairly irrelevant or not, well thought out. So that helps. And another thing that sustains me is the fact that there's always more work to do. I mentioned I could keep doing this for another 2 decades. There is, good reason for that. There's lots and lots. I mean, look at these books behind me. How many have I actually produced videos about that are deserving of getting the kind of treatment that I bring to them? Just a fraction. I could just look at this whole shelf, right? And just picking one at random. And I could be like, well, there's Process and Reality. That's a cool book that we could do something with. Or, Ricoeur's Oneself as Another. Or, I've got some Umberto Eco and, here's Leibniz. Haven't shot any videos on Leibniz yet. We could go on and on and on. So all of that makes it sustainable for me in ways that it might not be the case for other people who are doing philosophy in different manners on YouTube. We could ask about another thing. What would mess it up? Why do people find, not financially, but in terms of, let's call it their self-respect, why do they get sucked in and think that they really need to optimize their channels and their videos and their thumbnails and, pursue the will-o'-the-wisp of the latest topic or, thinker, theory, or stuff like that? So my answer to that, I think, is going to be unsatisfying to a lot of people and may actually make some of them angry, but I'm going to say it to you anyway. So, I'm a virtue ethicist, and I would frame it in terms of pursuing and prioritizing what most virtue ethics calls lesser goods in favor of higher goods, what the Stoics would call indifference. They have a kind of, alternate explanation for that as opposed to genuine goods. And what are these? Well, wealth, fame, what they called honor, power or position, opportunities, indulging your emotions, anger, fear, envy, those sorts of things. There might be a time and place for that. I mean, it's not as if you're making money, you can't do philosophy. Seneca's a great person to read about that, by the way. But if making money becomes the priority, you're probably not going to do philosophy very well. And it's the same thing if you tell yourself things like, well, the more people I get to look at my videos, the more people I can reach. And that's a really good thing. If you turn those metrics that YouTube loves into the highest priority, it's going to affect the way in which you do philosophy, I think. What matters more? Well, knowledge, actually conveying knowledge that we have. We have this amazing opportunity to talk to people all over the world in ways that, stick around for maybe decades about really cool stuff that's worth knowing about. And, maybe there's also, a form of virtue or virtuous activity involved in this. It's a good thing to help people out. I'm reminded of Antonin Sertillange in his little book, The Intellectual Life. He says, going back to the parable of the Good Samaritan and the question, who is your neighbor, right? Who is the neighbor? He says, if you're an actual intellectual, your neighbor is anybody who's in need of truth. And it's up to you to do the work to bring that to them. So there can be a certain kind of virtue involved there, but it's easily corrupted by focusing too much on, oh man, I want to be the big shot. I want to make a ton of money. I want people to be inviting me to these conferences and bringing me up on stage. Ooh, that's, no matter what it is, that's kind of a danger, isn't it? And the last thing I'll say about this is this should be not so much a matter of perfection and perfectionism, but propensity. Are you spending more of your time focusing on just like doing your job, doing what's good? Or are you focusing mostly on how can I get ahead? How can I have material, worldly success out there on social media and YouTube? That's a valid question. I think that YouTube is not unique in this respect. So this is another point. YouTube and other platforms will tend to corrupt a lot of people. Why? Well, YouTube itself reaches out to creators, right? And they're like, hey, you should try doing this. Here's a video about how you can improve this aspect. They have workshops and boot camps that you can join in. And I've done some of those. And basically, the people that you're involved with, they don't know anything about philosophy. They don't care anything about philosophy. They think it sounds cool, but they're mostly interested in you, boosting your channel, getting more views. They're probably getting a quota or something that they're satisfying by making sure that the people they work with are drawing more eyeballs to their videos. There was YouTube EDU for a while, but I think that's gone by the wayside. And there's similar things in Substack, for example. You look at like philosophy rising creators. I mean, most of the people in that aren't actually doing philosophy. They're doing schlock, right? But they're getting a lot more views and reads. It's the same thing in YouTube. Look at philosophy, YouTube. Who are the biggest accounts? Are they really doing philosophy in a consistent, reliable, well-informed, not just, trying to pander way? No, not really. And that's because YouTube promotes that. YouTube wants you to do things that way. The algorithm rewards stuff that has less substance, except for the fact that they do like longer videos. They want you to have your people watching as long as possible, right? But there's nothing in the algorithm that actually rewards competence or substance or anything remotely like that. So if you take YouTube and the feedback that you get from YouTube, not from YouTube viewers, but YouTube itself, as important, you're probably going to go astray. And that hasn't been the case for me, in part because I don't pay that much attention to what YouTube tells me to do, and I'm not that interested in jumping through the hoops that they set in front of me, right? And, maybe that's a temperament kind of thing. Moving on to another point, there's a really interesting suggestion that I talked about in the previous video by Jared Henderson that we should be like viruses in YouTube. And I think maybe we can broaden that. We should use the platforms the way that we want to, even if we're going against what YouTube tells us it wants to see or what other people are telling us that the internet wants. I get so much unsolicited advice. You should do this. You should do this. You should do this. And I'm not interested in it. I ignore it, right? We don't have to obey any of those sorts of injunctions, imperatives, suggestions, right? We do have to pick our battles. I mean, I don't think that you should make a video which is like, YouTube sucks so much, it's terrible, if you want to stay on YouTube. That might be imprudent, right? But, it's okay to use it the way that you want to. There's no guarantee, no matter what you do, that you're going to get or that you're going to keep a big audience. As I mentioned, during COVID, I saw the channel stats going up and I was like, oh, that's really interesting. They weren't going up astronomically, but I'm not getting the level of views right now that I was during COVID 5 years ago in 2020 and 4 years ago in 2021. But that's okay because, there's no guarantee. And I know people are still using the videos and finding some value in them. And I think that right now, people are like, oh, the window's closed. You could get into YouTube 10 years ago and really make an impact. I think you can still make an impact. There's lots of opportunities for doing cool stuff with philosophy that isn't being done. I mean, there's other stuff I could be doing, but I don't like to release more than one video a day, which is already a lot, right? Not just for me to shoot, but for you to watch. If you're following the channel, some people are like, oh man, you release too much stuff. I can't keep up with it, right? But why do I do that? Because there's so much cool stuff we could be doing. So I think there's great opportunity. There was a discussion about whether higher ed is in crisis. I'd say yes, it is. There is no such thing as higher ed as such. There's just a whole bunch of interlocking and different systems. There's no such thing as the academy or the university or, higher ed. But, we can generalize to some extent. And there were a lot of problems long before the internet got here with higher ed. I mean, I remember when I was in college sitting in classes where, philosophy classes, the majority of the students, even my math classes where we had, math majors, engineering majors, math ed majors, and computer science, not everybody was as interested in the topics that we were studying. A lot of them were just taking the classes because they were satisfying a requirement. The philosophy faculty was not held in great esteem by the real money makers or the administrators or anybody like that. So, we've had a problem with the humanities and higher ed for a long time. There are some things where YouTube can indeed offer substitutes for what higher ed traditionally has done. I think YouTube has opened up access to people all over the world in different countries where they don't have the same opportunities. In the United States, where one of the things that keeps a lot of people from being able to study at a college or university is the fact that they got to earn a living and they don't have the money to pay massive tuition and room and board and things like that, right? So YouTube is really kind of good for filling in those gaps for people who otherwise wouldn't have access, and in a way that continuing ed stuff can be in universities. It's also cool that it offers anybody who wants to watch a video anytime can get it. You could be watching it at 3 a.m. You don't have to just go to class and hear about something there. You can watch it over and over again, right? So that's really good. There's other cases where I would say we shouldn't think of YouTube videos as a replacement, but rather as something like a supplement to traditional higher ed. I created a lot of my own videos as resources for my own academic students, and I continue to do so today. It just so happens that many more people will watch them because they're available as a internet mediated and stored resource, and that's really awesome. My videos also get used in other people's classes. I don't have any clue about how many people are linking to or embedding my videos in their classes. I get anecdotal information every once in a while. Somebody's like, yeah, man, I had the students watching these videos, or I watched this video to help me prep this lecture, but I don't have a clue. I tried putting out a call and couldn't get enough information about it, but I'm willing to bet there's quite a few. I also will, mention that I, for a long time, have been kind of a promoter among academics of we should do more of this, right? And most academics don't want to do it. They just want to do their traditional classes. Unfortunately, of the ones who are receptive to doing it, I would say a lot of them are not very good at producing videos because there are skill sets involved, and you do have to be able to, talk in ways that ordinary non-academic people can understand, and a lot of academics just aren't good at that, not even in their face-to-face classes or talks, right? There's lots of other people who want to break in who are not academics because they perhaps think that teaching or producing content is really easy, and that's fine, but they're probably not going to be as helpful for this higher ed problem because there'll be a lack of rigor, consistency, knowledge. And, the last thing that I'm going to say about this aspect of things, I do get a lot of people who are like, oh, I watched your course on Aristotle. And I'll be like, you mean you watched a playlist, right? Because that's not a course. That's not an actual class. An actual class would include more than just a bunch of lectures. What you're watching would be more like, there was this thing that's still out there called the great courses. They're not courses. They're just a bunch of lectures. What you really need is homework and quizzes and tests and, various ways to engage the material. And then you got something that's more like a class, right? Simply having a bunch of videos or podcasts or whatever, that's not enough to do that. You got to provide more. And, you could use YouTube videos to do that, but YouTube by itself is not going to be enough for that. The last thing that I want to talk about before closing, there was a really interesting remark that was made fairly early on in Michael Burns' video about moral superiority. And what he said is that many channels are performing moral superiority to other people and inviting their audience to participate in moral superiority. So what does that actually mean? By consuming a certain kind of video content about philosophy, people get to feel like, oh, I'm part of an elite. I'm the smart one. I'm the person who's better than others because I study Hegel, or I study Simone de Beauvoir, or I study Aristotle. Pick whoever you want. There's probably different flavors of moral superiority depending on what kind of video you're consuming. But it is a consumer culture kind of thing. I think what that does is that turns philosophy into a prestige commodity that people don't actually have to understand. They get to carry around like a designer bag and be like, look at the club that I'm in and you're in that club too. And we're better than all these other, low class people who don't get it. And that's not good, right? I don't think that my channel conduces very well to that sort of thing. I've always been critical of that sort of approach. And, I'm sure there's probably people out there who are like, look at Dr. Sadler videos and that makes me a better person than you. I'm sure there's somebody out there like that, but I don't actually know them. And I could see how with other channels, it might be a little bit easier to do that, especially if they're very timely. I talk about the important issues of the day using theory, right? I don't really do that much, I talk about people who've been dead a long time. Sometimes I'll say, hey, this applies to your life. Here's how. But, that's about you applying it and using it. So, I think that's a greater risk for some channels than others, and not one that I worry an awful lot about. But if there ever is like a giant Dr. Sadler fan club, I probably wouldn't be a member. I'll leave it at that. So the last thing that I want to say to close this particular video off is that, as I was thinking through this, I'm grateful that the ways in which, without even really thinking it through a lot, I've set up my channel and conducted my work on YouTube as a philosopher for about 14 years at this point, has steered me away from some of these places where my channel and my psyche could have shipwrecked. I just happen to do things the way that I do, and it's fortunate for me. I'm also grateful for the many people that have watched and shared and left nice comments on the videos year after year after year. That's something that helps sustain creators, I think. That's quite important. I try to say thank you to people quite often when they leave a nice comment about something. I also say you're welcome when they thank me for posting stuff. And I'll also say thanks to Michael, for putting out his rather provocative video, and for, I won't say shaking me out of my dogmatic slumber as, Kant of Hume, but, for getting me to think about this and, shoot some video footage talking about these matters. So I'll close with that. I'll think about whether I need to shoot one more video. Perhaps I do, perhaps I don't, but I think that's probably enough about my particular stance or location within Philosophy YouTube in light of these, really quite important concerns.